Hello, BookTube. This is the rambling Raconteur here, Jack. And eventually, my goal is to have a channel where I go through the books as I read them. But as I'm starting here in January 2020, I thought it would be useful to go through some of the books I read in 2019 that I really appreciated and took something from, and to just share about that. And I've done a couple where I look and focus on books I'd read for the first time in 2019. And now I'd like to take a look at some books that I reread in 2019 and appreciated perhaps more than I had in the past or as much as I had in the past. I was asked a couple of weeks ago, do you ever reread books? And I was like, well, absolutely. As readers, when we approach a text, we approach it with who we are. We bring to it our experiences, our backgrounds. That's what's so powerful about texts, is how universal they can be when many people from different backgrounds, different experiences, different first languages, different ages can approach a text and take either the same thing or different things. But what's especially powerful is when people take the same thing from a text, and that just speaks to how powerful the mind is and how truly we are all humans. So when I reread, I don't reread as many books as I read for the first time, probably. But as I reread, I certainly just continue to appreciate certain texts. And so this one will focus on nonfiction and a little bit of poetry that I reread in 2019 and that I really liked. And so first up is Walden by Henry David Thoreau. This is the Viking Portable Library volume of Thoreau, which includes the complete text of Walden. It has some other writings, civil disobedience, some poetry, and also some other fantastic nature writings of Thoreau's. I'm a big fan of the Viking Portables. You'll see plenty of those over the weeks. But I had read Walden probably in high school, and I reread it this year in part because I was going to be in Tennessee for my sister's graduation from her master's program, and I was really excited about the chance to drop over to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And so I was reading Walden as I was sort of prepping to go to a national park, and knowing that I was going to spend some time outside. And I continued reading it through the month of May, which as a teacher that I ended up having some extra time as evening school classes ended or as other obligations ended, to spend some time outside. And one of the really powerful aspects of Thoreau is how quotable he is, but he's also part of that movement of thinkers like and writers like Ralph Waldo Emerson, who wrote an entire volume on or essay on quotations, and also thinkers like Samuel Johnson or Jim Boswell or Burton, The Anatomy of Melancholy, where when books were rare to a certain extent, people would just quote other books in their own essays and writing, because that was how they could share great ideas from those books. You couldn't trust that somebody could find a copy of that book. And so Thoreau's Walden is incredible because of what it speaks to in terms of, especially in the 21st century, about humans and humans interacting here on Earth specifically. And so there's some great ideas in here. It should not be by their architecture, but why not even by their power of abstract thought, that nations should seek to commemorate themselves. Towers and temples are the luxury of princes. A simple and independent mind does not toil at the bidding of any prince. Genius is not a retainer to any emperor. It would surpass the powers of a well man nowadays to take up his bed and walk, and I should certainly advise a sick one to lay down his bed and run. Talking about, how society and the controlling nature of society can really imprison a person, and we need to make sure that our minds are free to move forward in life. He's also quite funny with little bits like, none is so poor that he needs sit on a pumpkin. That is shiftlessness. What else is that? Every man is tasked to make his life, even in its details, worthy of the contemplation of his most critical and most elevated and critical hour. Why is it that a bucket of water soon becomes putrid, but frozen remains sweet forever? It is commonly said that this is the difference between the affections and the intellect. If you have built castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now put the foundations under them. A single gentle rain makes the grass many shades greener, so our prospects brighten on the influx of better thoughts. And so there's this sense, Walden's about living out there in nature and trying to avoid wasting time and wasting effort and wasting actions, but really it's about living in your mind and thinking more clearly, thinking more cleanly about how you connect with others, what you contribute to society. It's not just about taking. And that was just a really enjoyable work to reread here in 2019. Along with that, I try every year to read one epic. And this was one this was the third time I'd read it. I read Dante's Divine Comedy in high school, in AP Language or Literature. Thought it was mind-numbing. I reread it in 2015, right before my wife and I were going to Italy, and we knew we were going to be going to Florence. And it was just forcing myself to read it. This time, though, I read it in a new translation by Laurence Binyon. Again, this is the portable Dante from Viking Portable Library. And I loved it. I really felt this was one of those times where it wasn't so much I had grown as a person. I don't want to claim credit for that. I don't think I had changed so much in the past 4 years that when I reread the Divine Comedy, becoming a parent and things like that, turning 30, those weren't the things that made me appreciate Divine Comedy more. I really felt that the Binyon translation was fantastic. And I, for the first time, felt willing to recommend the Divine Comedy, especially the Purgatorio. I appreciated it in ways I never had. The Inferno read much more smoothly. I still think Dante's a bit of a misanthrope, and with the context of having to leave his hometown and knowing he could never go back under pain of execution, that would be horrifying. The Inferno is still very dark and unpleasant. Purgatorio is really fascinating. There's a sense where Dante is recognizing he's not worthy, and that it is nothing to do with himself, that none of his own actions or choices have allowed him to have this experience. And I think we all need to appreciate that. There are times where we receive things we don't deserve, and that was one of the major pieces I took from the Divine Comedy. And I'll definitely be looping back to it. In 2018 it was the Aeneid, in 2019 it was Dante. So we'll see what 2020 holds. Another reread from 2019 was one of my all-time favorite poets, John Donne. This is Modern Library, where it's got his complete poetry and selected prose. It has a lot of his sermons. It's famously the "Ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee" is not a Hemingway quote. It's actually from one of John Donne's sermons on mortality. And so I reread his Songs and Sonnets, which are very different from his sermons, very different from his religious poems, but are absolutely beautiful, just absolutely astonishing. I was reminded of these. I read them first in college when I was about 21 and loved them. I reread them a second time, and I reread them this summer after watching some of old Steve Donahue's videos on the Western Canon Starter Kit, which was part of how I discovered Book 2. Another nonfiction reread, and this was, I didn't read the entire volume, but the Viking Portable Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, so his essays, specifically his programs, and then also I dipped into his journals, which are just astonishing. It's very rare to get a first draft, second draft almost look at great thinkers, and the journals of Emerson almost allow you to do that. But some of the ideas from there that were really incredible, for example, imitation cannot go above its model. The imitator dooms himself to hopeless mediocrity. The inventor did it because it was natural to him, and so in him it has a charm. In the imitator something else is natural, and he bereaves himself of his own beauty to come short of another man's. And I think it speaks to that idea of originality, that so many people are trying to be the next someone else, or the next so and so, and instead we should be seeking to be the first ourselves. And that's we each bring something, and that's what's so important and so powerful. Other ideas from Emerson. Let's see. Men do not believe in a power of education. We do not think we can speak to divine sentiments in man, and we do not try. We renounce all high aims. We believe that the defects of so many perverse and so many frivolous people who make up society are organic, and society is a hospital of incurables. And there are so many people who think that way, who think that there is no need to try to improve the world around us, or try to improve ourselves, because that's just the way it's got to be. There always has to be, people who are poor, or people who are uneducated, or people who bad things happen to, instead of seeking to really perfect this place and seeking to improve ourselves. And I think Emerson is he's calling out some reformers and suggesting that maybe we should be digging a little deeper, digging a little harder. Okay. And so those were some great works that I had read in 2019. Another one was Thomas Paine, Common Sense, from his Library of America volume, and I dug into that. I think probably Thomas Paine is just, he's the original of the Angry Young Men. They didn't come out of Britain in the 1950s with John Osborne and the plays. It was Paine. He was pretty angry. And this book also has his writings on the French Revolution and on religion and some different things where you start to wonder where Paine's going. But Common Sense, of course, is a real cry to action. And one of the great pieces from it was he, at one point, lists all of the ships in the British Navy, how big they are, how large the ships are, how many guns they have, how long they are, and how much they cost. And then goes through, and he has this whole table, and then he goes through and identifies, what percent of them can actually be over here on the North American coast. And if we're going to fight the British Navy, we only need a small amount of these, and we've got all this land, and we've got all this money. We could finance a navy that can take on the British Navy. And he's right. But it's amazing to see somebody do this legwork in the 1770s to help get this clarion call for freedom. And that to me was very powerful. I actually had my AP statistics class do some least squares regression tests using that table, and tried to link it to our history department about, hey, let's dig into some real world data here. This is pretty fascinating. Somebody published this. What the heck does it mean? The final book, of course, that I reread in 2019, not the whole thing, but it's the book I'm reading every year, and that is the Bible. I have the New American Standard Translation, and the books within it that I really dug into this year were, and I read, from many. I was reading parts from Genesis as I was reading the stories of Jacob by Thomas Mann, and I read frequently. At least on a weekly basis. But this year, the ones that I really dug into were the letter from James and the Gospel of Mark, which to me seem of a piece where there's a sense of, we do things that are wrong because we want what we don't have. And that links in a certain way to Epicurus around the idea that if you're pursuing pleasure, you're going to be disappointed. If you are looking at what you already have, what you're already blessed with, and you're appreciating it, and then looking at how you can connect that to somebody else's need, you're going to be fulfilled. And the letter of James just nothing's hidden there. It's not a hidden secret. It's not a mystery. It's laid out there. You need to be doing the right thing. You need to have your heart in the right place, and if you do, you're going to see a different side of life than if you do not. I read the Gospel of Mark again, which is very powerful because it's just it's bursting with action. It's bursting with this. There's such an energy to it, and it's amazing to see texts that. And this is part of why I appreciated the classics when I started reading them later in high school and colleges. it's amazing to see the amount of energy that writers and thinkers from thousands of years ago can produce in a text that still speaks to us. That their energy, their just desire and passion as they're working, still jumps forward off that page and into our minds and into our into our psyche, our daimon, our soul, and allows us to grab onto it and think in a new way and conform our own life in some new way, and then reshape what we're thinking and how we're thinking. And then the other one I had read was the prophecy of Daniel from the Old Testament and the Hebrew Bible. And I looked, I was rereading many pieces, but those were the three where I was really doing deep rereads, trying to read commentaries, trying to read other texts they might connect to, trying to, watch videos or read articles on them. And Daniel, of course, was fascinating from the perspective of the different cultures and the collisions of cultures that exist there, but also this sense of eschatology or sort of end times thinking, where you see how the ways we shape our lives and the ideas we focus on in our lives, and sort of to help contextualize both good or bad things in our lives and the lives of those around us, and societies as they're rising and falling. How deep that tradition of thinking goes, and Daniel is a great one for that, and of course connects so quickly to and there's so much intertextual with the New Testament writers, especially within the Apocalypse of John, the Revelation of John, and then the absolutely fascinating component there where Daniel's writing about the Ancient of Days and sort of this figure. We have a picture from children's Bibles of God as this bearded old man, and or the Michelangelo's God in the Sistine Chapel, which, if you ever make it to Rome, please take the time, regardless of your faith background, go take the time to see the Sistine Chapel. And they don't allow you to take pictures, which is probably appropriate because it's something that needs to just be quietly appreciated as one. But we have that picture, and we don't really find that in the text of the Bible too often. But with Daniel, you sort of do when he writes about the Ancient of Days and this figure just sitting, on a throne as everything's happening. And it's just the imagery of Daniel is something that I think many writers have drawn from, and it's just an incredibly powerful set of images. I always find when I read William Blake that I need to go reread Daniel to reconnect and to think more deeply around that text. So those were some rereads, nonfiction and poetry rereads in 2019. James, Mark, and Daniel from the Bible. Common Sense. Some various essays, but especially the journals of Emerson. The Songs and Sonnets of John Donne. Dante's Divine Comedy. And Walden by Henry David Thoreau. Thank you, BookTube.